The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Independent Community Bankers of America. Welcome to our webinar, Are You Ready for .bank? I'd like to let you know that these slides can be found and downloaded at www.encirca.com/ICBA. And these will be our presenters this afternoon. First, we have Lily Thomas, ICBA Vice President and Senior Regulatory Counsel, responsible for ICBA's cybersecurity advocacy, participated in FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. We also have Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director, managing .bank and .insurance domain registries, former Chief Registry Liaison with ICANN. We also have John McElwain, partner from Nelson Mellons, Riley & Scarborough, focuses on intellectual property litigation and strategy. He was voted one of the best lawyers in America from 2013 through 2015. He is also Vice Chair of the Internet Committee for the International Trademark Association. And finally, we have Thomas Barrett, President of INCIRCA. INCIRCA is the first .bank accredited registrar founded in 2001. The sole registrar serving on FTLD's Security Requirements Working Group. INCIRCA is also a trademark agent for the Trademark Clearinghouse. This will be our agenda this afternoon. We'll start off with an introduction to new GTLDs, then we'll go on to bank policies, then trademark protection, then finally registration process and costs. Throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions, please enter them into the question box in the bottom right-hand corner of your GoToWebinar widget. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Lily Thomas on Introduction to New GTLDs.
Good afternoon, everyone. The Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, commonly known as ICANN, decided to expand generic top-level domains, the letters in the Internet domain name, immediately after the dot, from the previous level to hundreds and possibly thousands once the expansion is complete. ICANN, a not-for-profit organization, coordinates how unique Internet addresses are assigned worldwide. ICANN requires that all new generic top-level domains offer a sunrise period during which trademark holders may pre-register names that are the same or similar to their trademarks in order to avoid cyber squatting. A bank must have a trademark granted by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to participate in the sunrise period. This period occurs to the general launch of the new generic top-level domain. Registrars must be accredited by ICANN and approved by the operator of .bank and .insurance, FTLD Registry Services, LLC. We are very excited that the .bank generic top-level domain opened on May 17th for bank domains registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse. The .insurance generic top-level domain will launch in the fall of 2015. Community banks with insurance agencies will be interested in the .insurance domain. Next slide, please. .bank is owned and operated by the financial services community, which includes a coalition of banks, insurance companies, and financial services trade associations from around the world. Only verified members of the global banking community are eligible to register domains. For banks, it includes charter verification with the registrant's regulator. Domains must correspond to legal names. For example, ABC Bank would not be able to register XYZ Bank. .bank is a trusted, verified, and more secure and easily identifiable space on the Internet for the global banking community and its customers. Next slide, please. .bank is designed to be a trusted, protected, and more secure online location for banking services. Each applicant will be verified as legitimate members of the banking industry before being permitted to register for .bank. .bank establishes a solid foundation on which a bank can securely communicate with customers, stakeholders and regulators. The security bar is much higher for financial institutions than any other companies conducting business over the Internet, given their roles as trusted financial intermediaries for their customers. .bank is poised to be recognized online platform for growth and innovation in the banking sector. Next slide, please. ICBA applauds the formation of FTLD Registry, the registry operator for .bank and .insurance, and is pleased to serve as a founder, investor, and endorser of FTLD Registry. We believe it is critical to protect and serve the financial services community by creating a secure financial services channel on the Internet. Additionally, we believe it is in the best interest of the financial services industry to own, operate, and govern its own top-level domains. We are also pleased to be working with INCIRCA to help community banks understand and register for the soon-to-be-launched .bank generic top-level domain. As part of the agreement, community banks will be able to access a unique website with information and resources about securing and activating .bank domain names. INCIRCA and ICBA will also host frequent webinars allowing community bankers to learn about the eligibility for .bank domain, the registration process, and implementation tips. Additionally, ICBA members will be able to take advantage of the preferred pricing for .bank registrations.
Thank you very much, Lily. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Craig Schwartz to discuss .bank policies. Craig?
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to INCIRCA and ICBA for hosting another webinar and giving us an opportunity to talk directly to community banks about participating in the new .bank TLD. Next slide, please. So Lily has already talked a little bit about who FTLD Registry Services is and what ICBA's role is, has been in its formation and also its ongoing governance. We are ultimately here to serve and protect the sector, which is why we applied as a community applicant for the .bank and .insurance top-level domains. We have been now around for several years, but are pleased to report that we finally did launch .bank back on May 14th with our qualified launch program, a very limited registration period for FTLD's founding members. We are currently in the sunrise period, during which entities that have registered their trademarks in ICANN's Trademark Clearinghouse and who meet the eligibility requirements may register an exact match of their domain name, their registered trademark. Sunrise will be open through June 17th. And so far, we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest, so clearly we're very excited. We do have a variety of ways that community members can participate in FTLD registry services, in addition to registering .bank domains. It may be through participating in our community-based security requirements working group, which is responsible for developing the requirements that are mandated by FTLD for .bank registrants. It also may be that you're interested in serving on our advisory council, which is the body that weighs in on policy development for FTLD registry services. We have a couple of key technology partners, VeriSign, which is our infrastructure service provider. They are effectively the company responsible for making sure the domain works and that domain names resolve. Symantec is our registry verification agent. They will be the ones that are verifying you as an eligible banking institution and a host of other information that I know Tom will get into in more detail during his presentation. And then we have authorized a select group of registrars to distribute our domain names. The list of those registrars is available on our website at www.register.bank/registrars. And INCIRCA is obviously one of those approved registrars. Next slide. So there are a variety of restrictions around entry into and use of domain names in .bank. The first one is our eligibility requirements, and as you can see, there are a few categories of entities that are eligible to have .bank domains. For the vast majority of registrations that will happen in this space, they will be from chartered and regulated banking institutions. We do enable trade associations to participate, so if ICBA wanted ICBA.bank, that would be permissible. We do enable groups of banking associations, such as the European Banking Federation, whose members itself are other trade associations. We also permit industry service providers, or you may know them as core service processors. Some more common examples of those are Fiserv and First Data and Jack Henry and FIS Global, and perhaps you use others. But we understand that due to the critical role core service providers serve in either managing your websites or managing your online banking services, that it's important for them to be able to participate in the .bank space. And then finally, we do enable government regulators to participate if they so choose. Next slide, please. So another one of the ways that .bank is restricted, in a sense, is that we mandate a number of requirements, security, that are either the responsibility of your registrar, such as INCIRCA, to implement, and or you as the domain name holder. We do have mandatory verification and re-verification of eligibility for all entities before domains are actually awarded. And we do, for example, verify with your government regulatory authority that you are active and in good standing with them before we approve a registration for you. And we do that process every 2 years, or at the time that your domain name is renewed, whichever comes sooner. We also have a number of security provisions, DNSSEC, which at the very core is intended to make sure that when someone is looking for your website and typing in your domain into a browser, that they're actually getting to where they intended to get to and not being misdirected or redirected to some malicious site. Email authentication is a way of effectively advertising, not in the sense of advertising that we most know it, but in publishing a record in your DNS or in the domain name system that informs email service providers such as Google and Yahoo and Microsoft that there are certain rules that they must abide by when delivering email purporting to come from your email address. And the primary goal of having authenticated email is to mitigate phishing and spoofing and some of the other activities that are propagated by email to unsuspecting users. A strong encryption is required to protect communications that you send over the internet. It effectively protects the client to server connection and the transmission of data. It doesn't actually encrypt the data within, for example, an email, but it encrypts the connection between the two entities talking to one another. Multi-factor authentication is something that INCIRCA does if they are your registrar, or another registrar must do if you choose somebody else. What multi-factor authentication does is requires, beyond a username and password, some other piece of data that you would have that would enable you to access INCIRCA's system. It could be provided through a service like Google Authenticator, which issues one-time passwords through your phone. It could be through some type of SMS service that is developed that sends a message to your smartphone. But again, this is something that your registrar must do for you. Prohibition of privacy and proxy services effectively states that the underlying registration contact data associated with your domain name must be for the bank itself and not for some third-party service provider or otherwise. We have created this rule, this prohibition, largely due to requests from law enforcement who have told us and other registry operators that when proxy registration data is provided in and associated with a domain name, that it's very hard, if not impossible, for them to track down the bad guys. So we are making that easy by prohibiting this type of service. And the requirement to use .bank name servers, and I know that Tom will get into this a little bit more during his session, but this is intended to further heighten the security and our ability to enforce compliance with that security in .bank. Next slide, please. So another restriction in .bank is our name selection policy, and that is we have two different rules depending on the period that you're registering domain names. During the sunrise process, which is something that John will speak about during his segment, the process that, or I should say the period that we're in right now, a sunrise registration means that your domain name must be an exact match of the mark you have registered in ICANN's Trademark Clearinghouse. So if your mark is the best bank in the world, the only domain you could register during sunrise is the best bank in the world .bank. However, during the general availability period, which starts on June 24th, which is when the vast majority of banks will participate in .bank, that naming rule is relaxed a bit, and we say your name must correspond to a trademark, a trade name, or a service mark. So again, if your name is the best bank in the world, perhaps you want to register the best bank .bank. So something shorter, perhaps more memorable. And we'll get to, on the next slide in a moment, some examples of how you might structure your name. We also have a variety of names that are not available for registration. The third bullet identifies common community names, generics, and geographics. And all of our reserved names are both identified on our website, pardon me, or on Encirca's webpage. An example of a common community name that is not available for registration is Community First. And in the United States, there are many, many, many banks that go by Community First. And so what we've said is, while you can't have Community First .bank, there is nothing to prevent you, or I should say it's perfectly acceptable for you to structure your name a different way. So if you are the First Community Bank of Florida, you might want, if you are a Community First Bank of Florida, you might want Community First FL, you might want CFFFL, or an acronym, if I got that properly, which I'm not sure that I did, but you get the point that you have more flexibility during general availability, which you don't have during the sunrise period. We also have a host of generic names such as checking.bank, savings.bank, loan.bank, and those names, along with our common community names, while not available now, may be made available at some point in the future. If we do decide to release those names, we would post information about that on our website. We would let our registrars know about such domains being available, and then we would have a registration period start for those domains. Thank you, Andrew. So here we have some examples of the corresponding rule. Again, how you might structure your domain name to be something perhaps shorter, easier to remember than perhaps what you have now. And while these are some examples, you can certainly be a bit more creative if you so choose. And I think that concludes my section of this presentation.
Thank you, Craig. I'd like to remind everyone, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please enter them into the question box of your GoToWebinar widget. And now regarding trademark protection, I'd like to hand it over to John McElwain. John?
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to Encirca and to ICBA for having me speak at this webinar. As you've heard, I'm going to cover the intersection of trademark protection with the .bank launch. Trademark protection is important in the domain name system for three primary reasons. The first is it allows a registration in the Trademark Clearinghouse. Second, it allows for a trademark holder to take advantage of sunrise registration, and it impacts the verification process. And lastly, it allows a bank to protect its mark from having others use a similar mark in a domain name. So to start with, I'm going to cover the intersection of trademarks with the .bank launch, which is primarily going to impact the timing of a bank's ability to register a domain name. So here we have the .bank launch phases, and I'm first going to start with a little bit of explanation of the certain terminology on this slide. TMCH means the Trademark Clearinghouse. The Trademark Clearinghouse is the entity authorized by ICANN to serve as a repository of trademark registration data. It's not to be confused with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Those are two separate entities. The United States Patent and Trademark Office is the governmental agency in which an applicant files for a federal trademark registration. The sunrise period, which you've heard about already and which .bank is currently within, is an early registration period open only to holders of trademark registrations who have recorded those trademarks with the Trademark Clearinghouse. As you can see, that started at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on May 17th. The general availability period, sometimes referred to as the land rush period, is the period of time in which any person can register a .bank domain name provided that they meet the eligibility requirements. General availability is open to all banks. The start time is 8 p.m. Eastern Time on June 23rd. Go to the next slide, please. So the sunrise period, as I mentioned, is the early registration period available only to banks that have a trademark that is registered by the USPTO and then recorded in the Trademark Clearinghouse. During that process, upon approval by the Trademark Clearinghouse, the trademark holder will be issued a signed mark data file, SMD file. There's still time to get validated by the Trademark Clearinghouse. It's taking typically 5 days to maybe a week for the approval process to occur at the Trademark Clearinghouse. So we still have time to go ahead and take a federal trademark and record it with the Trademark Clearinghouse so that you can take advantage of the sunrise period. Remember, however, that allocation of .bank domain names during the sunrise period is on a first-come, first-served basis. It is also on a first-come, first-served basis in the general availability period. You'll need to use an accredited registrar such as INCIRCA. Also keep in mind that verification still must be passed. So just having a Trademark Clearinghouse signed mark data file or approval from them does not mean necessarily that you'll get your .bank domain name. Also keep in mind, as Craig covered, that the corresponding rule does not apply during sunrise, so that your .bank domain name that you are applying for in the sunrise must be an exact match to the mark that you have recorded with the Trademark Clearinghouse. This is not a requirement of .bank. This is actually a requirement that ICANN has for all sunrise periods in all of the new GTLDs that are launching. Go to the next slide. So just to summarize, when should a bank register in the sunrise period? That would be if you already have a federal trademark registration. In a few cases we've heard on these webinars, people are having applications that are registering. So if you have an application register at the USPTO within the next few weeks, you're still eligible to get in line for the sunrise period, and you can register with the Trademark Clearinghouse. Again, keep in mind that that .bank domain name must be an exact match of the trademark registration that the bank owns. When are you going to want to register in the general availability period? That's going to be when you don't have a federal trademark registration, and many community banks don't. State trademarks and business licenses, those will not count. You must have a federal trademark issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. On that point, if you need to check on it, you can go to www.uspto.gov and click on the trademarks section, and then click on the button for search trademarks and search for your bank's name or your bank's trademark to try a quick check as to whether you have a federal trademark registration. The other time you'd want to take advantage of the general availability period, as we've talked about, is when the .bank that you're seeking is not an exact match. So as we heard Craig talk about the corresponding, spanning the dot, if you want to register an acronym, you want to register your bank's name with a geographical extension, all of those rules that Craig covered, if it's not matching your federal trademark, then you'd have to seek it in the general availability. With that, we'll pass it back over to Andrew.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, John. Regarding registration process and costs, I'd like to hand it off to President of Encirca, Tom Barrett.
Thank you, and thank you to all the ICBA members who turned out today to hear about .bank. I started Encirca back in 2001, and we specialize in the top level domains such as .bank that make sure their end users belong to that particular industry or community. There are certainly other new top level domains that might appeal to banks as well, but none of them are restricted to banks. So your motivation for that might not be so much for branding, but perhaps for marketing campaigns or defensive purposes to protect your brand. But .bank is the only finance-related TLD that is being run and operated by the banking industry that restricts users, registrants to banks, and has the security requirements that will give some confidence to consumers for online banking. So what I'm going to talk today about is the actual mechanics of the registration process for .bank. Some of this is very similar to how you might register a .com domain name, and some of it is very different. So let's say we're talking 3 or 4 months from now, .bank has gone live. How will you register a .bank domain name? Well, first you go to an ICANN registrar like Encirca, you put in the name you want, and we'll tell you if that name is available for registration. And so we check the reserved names list, we check whether or not the name's already been registered, and if it's available, then you can proceed and enter your order at that registrar. After you enter in your credentials proving you're a bank and put in your payment information, that domain name will get reserved for you in real time. And that's critical because it's first come, first served. So even if you have, for example, the .com equivalent of a name you want, that does not guarantee that you will have rights to it in .bank. Remember, .bank is a global top-level domain. Anyone in the world can apply for a .bank domain name if they're a eligible bank. And it does not have to be an exact match to their existing website or their legal name. It simply needs to correspond to it. And so it's important to remember that you want to get there first in order to reserve your name. Once it is reserved, then the registry using Symantec will undergo their verification process. So the verification does not happen until the name is actually reserved for your particular bank. Now, I'll talk in a minute about what that verification process consists of, but once the bank completes that verification process, the .bank domain name is released from its hold status and is ready for activation by the bank. Next slide, please. So what is involved in the verification process? Well, registrars like Encirca will ask for several pieces of information as part of the .bank process. And we then, after we register the domain name for you, we send all that information to the verification agent. And they undergo a security check of your bank, or a background check. They make sure that the license or charter for the bank is still valid. They will make sure that the domain names that you're requesting correspond to your existing bank legal name. They'll verify the physical address, the phone number, and the last step is they'll look at the contact who is providing all this information to the registrar. And they will want to make sure that person, in fact, is a full-time employee of the bank and is authorized by the bank to submit those domain names. And so as part of the data we collect as a registrar, we also ask for your HR executive or someone who serves that role in your bank, and then also perhaps the immediate manager or supervisor of that point of contact, so that Symantec can reach out to them and verify that in fact you do work for the bank and you're authorized for the bank. That process takes about 2 days, and the registry plans to repeat it at least every 2 years. So let's say you complete the verification process. What's next? So on the activation of that domain name, the first point to remember is that it's completely independent from your existing website. You do not need to activate your .bank domain name right away. Once you do, you can run it in parallel with your existing website, and in fact, you can redirect one domain name to the other. The important requirement is that .bank domain names must use .bank name servers. And so you cannot use the same DNS hosting name servers that you use for your current website. Our recommendation at Encirca is that you use your own .bank domain name for your name servers. So for example, if you currently use Network Solutions or GoDaddy or UltraDNS to provide your DNS name servers, you cannot use those name servers for .bank. And so Encirca has a solution, which we'll talk about in a second, where we can create name servers for you using your own .bank domain names. So let's talk about costs for .bank. I'm sorry, before I get into that, I want to talk about the service that we provide as part of .bank. We are in what we call the pre-screening phase. Although Sunrise has begun last Sunday, general availability does not begin until June 23rd. And so what we're doing now is we are forming a line of banks who want to make sure that their names are reserved the second the registry opens for business. So as part of that process, we are offering a free pre-screening, no obligation type of service where we will look at the names you want to apply for. We will make sure that they are not reserved. We will check to see if they have been registered already during Sunrise, and we will make sure that they correspond to your existing bank name. And most importantly, we will insert them into our queue so that you have nothing more to do. And on June 23rd at 8 p.m., we will submit those names on your behalf. So again, once you complete the pre-screening process with us, there's no other steps you need to do until after we have reserved those names for you. And at that point, the verification process will begin. We do have some optional services that you might consider. One is our premium DNS service. And so many banks are interested in activating their name as soon as possible. And in fact, we're offering a service to make that possible, since we recognize your existing web hosting or DNS provider may not support .bank. We have banks who are applying for multiple names, but some of them say, look, we have an alternative name which we want if and only if our primary name is not available. So we have a fallback service just to answer that need. And finally, we are supporting all of the other top-level extensions, and we've already had requests for banks who want to consolidate all their domain names with one registrar. They're finding out that their existing registrar does not support .bank. Next slide. Excuse me. So in terms of pricing, .bank at Encirca is $999 a year, and this reflects both the verification that is being done by Symantec as well as the annual registration fee. ICBA members are receiving a 10% discount, and this really effectively gives ICBA members the lowest price in the industry, according to a survey that we've done recently of the other registrars. Most importantly, you can start this process within Circa. You can be added into our queue and complete the pre-screening process before you make any payment. And so we have a process where you can start that today, and once you decide you want to proceed, then you can effect payment to Encirca via credit card, ACH, or bank check. Refunds are given if we're not successful in registering your names. There may be a processing fee held back by the registry if they feel like the verification data was not submitted in an honest manner. Next slide. So I mentioned some of our optional services. One of them is what we call our premium DNS service, and we are offering a free 3-month trial with all .bank domain names so that you can instantly activate your .bank domain name upon the completion of the verification step. Our DNS service includes vanity name servers using your new .bank domain name. It includes the mandatory DNSSEC and DMARC requirements for enhanced security, and will redirect your .bank domain name to your existing website. This is a flat fee service, so you can use it for all of your domain names if you choose to register multiple .bank domain names and all your .com, .net domain names. The service is a one-size-fits-all for as many names as you want to use for that. And then finally, as I mentioned, we also have a fallback service for those who have an alternative name that they want to apply for if and only if their first choice is not available. Next slide. So what can you do today? As I mentioned earlier, we already have a line of banks who have completed the pre-screening process and are basically in the queue ready to be submitted for June 23rd. We are also very busy still processing Sunrise applications and helping banks with registered trademarks submit their trademarks to the Trademark Clearinghouse in time for the Sunrise, which ends on June 17th. So we can help you determine what your desired names will be. We'd be happy to schedule a phone consultation with you for that purpose. We can determine if the names you're asking for are reserved or already taken by a trademark owner. And so this helps you decide if and when you might have competition for the names that you're applying for, and what your strategy should be in terms of which names will represent your brand, which ones you might want to defensively register because you don't want another bank to have those names. And finally, of course, by completing this process now, rather than waiting until June 23rd, you are added to our submission queue and automatically get submitted on June 23rd, so that name is reserved for your bank. Next slide. So that's our webinar for today. We would welcome any questions you have, and we'll try to answer as many as we can today. Your next step is you can go to encirca.com/ICBA and complete the pre-screening form. Again, no payment is required today. We also can follow up with you and schedule a phone consultation if you have some more specific questions about your bank strategy. And finally, if you have any special trademark questions, you can contact John McElwain at john.mcelwain@nelsonmullins.com for his advice as well. Andrew?
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. You can find it at www.encirca.com/ICBA. You can also find a copy of the slides for this webinar at the same website. Now we have a couple questions in the queue. I'll open up to the first one. We have a bank that is changing names at the end of the year. When would they be able to reserve their .bank site?
You want to take that, Craig?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one, Tom. So the eligibility requirements mandate that the bank be chartered and supervised by a regulatory authority at the time of registration. So if the bank name hasn't officially changed and is not recognized by the regulator, my reaction is that you would have to wait until that change happened. It also could be, though, well, I guess my answer stands with that. Tom, do you have any kind of different take on that?
Yeah, we actually had a bank that contacted us, and they were changing names July 1st, which is fairly close to the launch. And the question is, in order to complete the verification, certainly there are different elements required. One is a license number. And so, in fact, if your license is going to change, that may be problematic. But if there's a way for you to get your license number early, you can certainly qualify under your existing name. In some cases, you might perhaps, if you're changing your name, perhaps there's a way you can start using it in commerce so that you can show some proof of use of that name.
Okay, great. Thank you. So will adopt bank TLD, is this a requirement for all banks?
No, so the short answer is no. It's not a requirement. It just like any other domain, it's a choice on whether to use it or not. And we certainly hope that banks do because of the trusted and verified nature of it, but it's certainly not a requirement.
Thank you, Craig. And how would you recommend a bank that has a .com right now? How would they transition from their .bank? Do they have to do it as soon as they register the name?
No, so the short answer is there's no use requirement, period, and there's certainly not a requirement that stipulates when you have to use it if you choose to use it. So what we have told banks that we've talked to is get in early in the process to make sure you have the best chance of getting the domain that you'd like to have. And then you can take the time to figure out what your strategy is around rolling it out and using it.
Great, thank you. And moving on to trademark questions. You mentioned that the Trademark Clearinghouse requires documents in order to receive a valid trademark. What do they want as a proof of use?
This is John. So for a bank, what we have used primarily for a proof of use has been a screenshot of their website showing that mark being used to market or used in connection with banking services. What also would be fine would be an advertisement, a brochure, anything that shows the bank's registered mark that you're seeking to put into the Trademark Clearinghouse used to advertise banking services will suffice.
Thank you, Craig. And could you also highlight how a bank can, or remind us how a bank can find out whether or not they do have a federally registered trademark?
Sure. If you go to www.uspto.gov and then click on trademarks, there is a section or a button for searching trademarks, and it's a pretty simple input where the bank would just need to type in the mark that it believes it may own or the bank's full corporate name, do a search to see if any marks show up. That's the easiest way to do your own examination as to whether you have a registered trademark.
Okay, thank you, John. Regarding the .bank process, so say a bank goes to Encirca, fills out the pre-screening application, what do they have to do between now and June 23rd when .bank goes live?
So this is Tom. There's really nothing else you need to do unless we find issues in the pre-screening process. We will let you know if, for several things. We'll let you know if the name you're applying for has been already registered or reserved, in which case you'll have to specify other names. And in fact, our form today is starting to check for those automatically. We will let you know if another bank has already applied for that name at Circa, in which case we're going to honor that first request and ask that you either pick another name or pick another registrar. And then lastly, of course, since payment is not required up front, you will need to make sure you make payment prior to June 23rd.
Great, thank you, Tom. And can you attest to how a bank would go about applying for the sunrise period? You mentioned that it already started now. Would it be too late to get a trademark into the clearinghouse and fill out an application?
Absolutely not. We're still helping. In fact, we find quite a few banks are struggling with a trademark clearinghouse. They expected it to be a fairly straightforward process, and these things never are. And so we are helping several banks who have started that process with a trademark clearinghouse. They're getting rejected for a variety of reasons. So we help them correct the documents so that they match exactly how the trademark clearinghouse would like to see them. Then we get back the SMD file, and we can submit in fairly short order their sunrise registration.
Again, thank you, Tom. One final question. It was mentioned that .bank will be first come, first serve. So this means that if more than one bank requests the same name at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, will it go to auction, or will you take it down to milliseconds? How will you allocate the requested name?
So this is Tom again. It will be first come, first serve, and that will come right down to the milliseconds. And so Circa has been around since 2001. We've gone through quite a few of these land rush type situations. And so we recognize how to do some multi-threading of our processes. We were able to determine which names we think will be most sought after. For example, 3-letter acronyms we think will be the most competitive in the case of .bank. And so we have ways to maximize our success rate for these land rush conditions.
Awesome, thank you. And we have no further questions at the moment. So I believe that concludes our webinar today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, members of the ICBA, our panelists, Craig, Lily, John, and Tom. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.